you came to hear Paul tonight, I apologize. We'll do the best we can with what we got to work with tonight. I want to say a few words first about Paul. I've attended church all my life so far, and I've had the privilege of hearing a lot of different preachers. And I'll be honest with you, he's probably as good as I've heard, because he is sound scripturally. He is probably as highly educated as anyone I've had the privilege of listening to, but he doesn't know how smart he is. And he has the ability to, I call it personalizing the scriptures and internalizing the scriptures, because he takes and he makes those scriptures relevant to us today in our lives. And that's what we need. We need to find out how this book works in our lives today to make us the kind of people we need to be. And I'll be honest with you, the more I experience life, I've learned to use terms different from getting older or maturing, because I made a mistake of using that term one day in a lesson, and people said, well, I don't think you've matured much. So I use the term experiencing life more and more. I find that this book really works in everyday life, in business, in personal relationships, in family relationships. The precepts and the directions that are here work. And Paul has the ability to take those things, as we've looked through Hebrews and we're looking through Nehemiah, and he finds and he shows to us the applications. We were talking about it the other day. He points out things that I've never seen in those scriptures before. He takes the Greek and explains it, not flaunting his ability to speak and to understand Greek, but takes it and makes it where the scriptures come alive to you. And that's what we're looking for. And I hope someday that I can emulate that in the lessons. Peter wrote in 1 Peter 3 and verse 15, and he wrote these words. He said, but sanctify the Lord your God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to anyone who asks you. And it's interesting to finish that statement. You know, we sometimes think we need to be able to answer all the questions that people ask us. Well, Jim, can you explain to us the Godhead? Well, no, I really can't. Can you explain to us how the Holy Spirit works in you today? Well, no, I really can't. Can you explain to us the methodology of creation, how God took nothing and made something out of it? No, I can't. But you know, when Peter wrote those words, you remember how he finished that? Be ready to answer to anyone who asks you what? Not any specific question, but one thing. The reason for the hope that lies within you. And that's what this is all about. Why do we come here? Because we have hope. We have expectation. We have anticipation. We know there's something better than this life, and it's provided for us through His Son. I think it's interesting that God would inspire Peter to write those words. if you look at all the apostles, when you look at Paul, you see, in my mental picture, I see a college professor, because, he said himself, he said when it came to being a student of the law, he said, I excelled above anybody. He said, I was the best there was. But you look on the exact opposite end of that, and you look at Peter. Peter was, when I picture Peter, I picture somebody rough, gruff, who grew up tough, who was a fisherman, who knew what it was to work, who knew what it was to slave all day and not catch anything. And yet, the one you think would have the answer for everything, Paul, was not inspired to write those words. And I think if you ask Peter, can you answer all those other questions? No, I can't answer that. But I know one thing. I know the reason for the hope that lies in me. So tonight, I'm not going to try to even attempt to follow Paul with something from Hebrews or anything from Nehemiah. I just want to ask you a question to start out. If you could visit with, or if you could talk to, or just sit down and have a conversation with any person from history, who would you want to talk to? Who would you want to just sit down and talk to? I don't know if any of you ever remember the cartoon that came on, Rocky and Bullwinkle. Rocky and Bullwinkle. I didn't care much for Rocky and Bullwinkle, but there was one character on there I thought a lot of. That's Mr. Peabody. Mr. Peabody and Sherman, because they had what? A Wayback Machine. And I thought, man, that's neat. Now, I wish. But if you could go back and talk to anybody in history, who would it be? Now, most of you, if you spoke out in this class, one of you would say, I'd love to go back and talk to Paul. I'd love to go back and talk to Peter or any of the apostles or even Christ himself. That would be the answer. That would be the perfect answer. But I'm asking you about somebody you'd really like to just sit down and just have a conversation with because you think they're interesting people. I can think of two. And they're polar opposites. Just opposite. First one would be Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra. Now, y'all may not know him, but he was, if you were going to build a baseball player, he would be the one you would not use. He was short, he was fat, he was slow, he was not real intelligent. But some of the things he said, I wish I could just go back and sit down with him and write down what he said. I had a friend, and I've shared this with you, and I want to tell River Road I appreciate it because this friend of mine came down here and visited 2 or 3 times when he started going to church. And he best friend one of the best friends I ever had. An ex-Hell's Angel, motorcycle rider, drag racer, beer drinker, just smoked cigarette, just anything you could think of. But he'd do anything for me. And he protected me. And he became a Christian before he died. But I wish I had written down everything he said. But with Yogi Berra, I wish I'd written it down because he had some of the best things. I remember one every time I go to Harper Hills. He said, be sure when your friends die, go to their funerals. Because if you don't go to their funerals, they won't come to yours. When you come to a fork in the road, pick it up. Nobody. I'd love to sit and talk to you, but the second person I would really love to have an opportunity to sit down with is Abraham Lincoln. One of the most fascinating men I've ever read about. And I would love to be able just to sit down and talk to him, because if you look at his life, he would probably be considered one of the biggest failures of all time prior to being elected president. He'd failed in business twice. He'd lost a law practice. He'd had a nervous breakdown. He'd run for office unsuccessfully 6 times. His mother had passed away that he dearly loved. His childhood sweetheart also. When it came down to run for the presidency, the only reason he got nominated because everybody got to fighting over other 2 people, and he just kind of got it by default. But he was one of the most intriguing individuals. He was the one who held this nation together in probably the most tumultuous time that our country had ever seen or has ever experienced. He was strange in that he lived kind of by the philosophy you may have heard from one of the Godfather movies: keep your friends closer, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. All the people that were his combatants in the primaries and in the nomination, he appointed to his cabinet. He even had members of the other party in his cabinet. He was a man who would listen to the opinions of others and use them to form his own opinions. Someone was talking to him one day, and they were talking about all the struggles he had seen and all the problems he'd faced, decisions he had to make. And conversation came around, and he was asked, President Lincoln, how do you make those decisions? He said, well, sometimes I ask my advisor about them, and I take all their opinions and I weigh them. Sometimes, as my mother would do, I'd pray about them. But then sometimes I come to the realization and accept the fact that some problems don't have an answer to them. And they said, well, what do you do then? He said, it's like the farmer was breaking new ground. And in the middle of that field was a stump. And the stump was too hard to dig. It was too knotty to split. It was too wet and too soggy to burn. So what did you do with it? He said, I just plowed around it. I just plowed around it. Sometimes we have stumps in our lives. Sometimes we have problems there are no answers to. I have situations in my life that you don't know about. And I'm sure you have things in your life that I don't know about. We all have stumps. We all have thorns. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and this will be where we take our lesson tonight. Paul doesn't talk about the stumps in his life. He talks about the thorns in his life. He spent the previous chapter defending his apostleship, talking about how he was an apostle, how he had the right to claim that apostleship. He talked about that time when he talks about the man that was taken up into the third heaven, into paradise, really relating something that happened to him 14 years prior. But then he makes a strange statement. He said, and I'll paraphrase it. He says, just so I didn't get too high and mighty about it, I was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan that buffeted my body. We could talk for hours about what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. What was he talking about when he talked about this messenger from Satan that buffeted his body? You know, we know all about the trials that Paul went through. We know about all the sufferings he went through, the beatings he had, all the times he was beaten with rods, the times he was cast into prison, shipwrecked, left for dead. We know about all those things. Paul, how did you deal with that? How do I deal with the thorns in my life? Or as Abraham Lincoln put it, how do I deal with the stumps in the field? I don't know what any of you are going through outside what you've told me. But I can almost bet there are things that you wish there was an answer for. Sometimes you pray, and sometimes you pray, and sometimes you pray, and the problem is still there. What do you do then? Oh, well, if you ask the preacher, he said, you need to understand that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord, who are the called. I know Romans 8:28. But I can tell you, some things that happen, excuse my West Nashville vernacular, and deal with it. How do I deal with the thorns? How do I deal with the stumps in life? I think one of the first things we need to do is to realize and accept the fact that sometimes the answer is no. I don't know if, I'm trying to think if it's, Teresa may have known my mother. My mother was a tremendous lady. She was a great cook. She could knit, crochet, paint, do ceramics, and she was the original multitasker. She could sit and crochet an Afghan while watching her television and at the same time beating my father in double six dominoes. All at the same time and never miss a beat. She was a doctor. She had to be a doctor. My grandmother was a doctor, so my mother became a doctor without license. But for the longest time, I didn't realize it. She was a songwriter also. Didn't realize this. About 1992, I think it was. I was married, away from home. Song came on the radio, country music radio, Lorrie Morgan. And when I first heard it, I knew that she had stolen from my mother the catchphrase of that song. And the title of it was, "What Part of No Understand?" Now, I can tell you, Lorrie Morgan did not write that song. My mother wrote that song. Because let's just be honest, I'm not the brightest light on the board or the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I've come a long way from where I was growing up. And I was just stupid growing up, because I'd go talk to my mom and I'd say, I want to do so-and-so. No. And I just keep asking and asking and asking. And finally she'd say, "Go ask your father," which was right after "wait till your father gets home," as the very words I did not want to hear. So I go, wait, Dad come home. My dad was kind of the opposite of my mother. My dad is a man of very, very few words. He never learned certain words. My father never learned the word goodbye. If you talk to my dad on the phone, when he was finished, he was finished. You'd be talking and you'd hear click. He'd just hang up. No goodbye, no see you later, no talk to you about it or anything. He'd just hang up on you. So he'd come home and I'd go tell him what I wanted to do. The only question would be, what did your mother say? Well, Mom said I needed to come and talk to you. Your mom said no, didn't she? The answer is no. I didn't even get to explain what the problem was, what I wanted to do. Sometimes we need to realize and accept. Proverb asks the question, what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? An irresistible force meets an immovable object. One of two things happens. Nothing happens, because the forces are equal and opposite. And so in the laws of physics and mathematics, the two will cancel one another out. Or in some cases, when an irresistible force, an immovable object, irreparable is done. Paul, the one we're just looking at in 2 Corinthians, said, I had a thorn in the flesh. Don't know what it was. Don't know if it's physical, mental. I don't know if he's referring to the problems he had with the early Christians or with the Jews or what it was. But he said three times. And the word there is, I pleaded with God. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I can tell you from reading books what it actually denotes is this. God. I begged God 3 times to take it away. What was the answer? No. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the thorns in your life will stay there because the answer is no. God told Paul, He said, my grace is sufficient. Paul said, I understand, but I would still like to get rid of this problem. I don't think Paul was ever to the point where he said, okay, I'll just accept. No. Sometimes the answer is no. And sometimes we deal with our stumps and we deal with our thorns because we have no other choice. If it's not sufficient enough for you to look at the example of Paul, let me take you back a few years prior to that, outside Jerusalem in a garden called Gethsemane. A man sat, and it said his sweat was as drops of blood. And 3 times Christ prayed, Father, if it is possible, what? Let this cup pass from me. You know, and sometimes we read those things and we go through them so quickly. He probably spent close to 3 hours with this one prayer and this one request. And the answer was no. Sometimes we have to accept the inevitable and plow around the immovable in our lives. Understand that sometimes the answer is no. A second way I think you deal with it is this. You look for the good that can come from your problem. Well, Jim, that doesn't make any sense to me. If I'm struggling, if I'm dealing with difficult times, we've all lost loved ones. We've lost friends. And it's hard to realize the good that can come from that. Go back to the story of Joseph. If you got brothers and sisters, did you always get along with them? Did you always get along with them? Did you fight with your brothers and sisters? I had an older sister, and we fought all the time, because I was a whole lot smarter than she was. I was a whole lot better child than she was. I was dumb, but I was good. Never once, I don't think, did she ever, now she considered killing times, I know that. I don't think she ever considered selling me, though. Did you ever consider selling your brother or sister? She's contemplating this right now. She's trying to figure out how much he's worth right now. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put that thought out there, should I? Some things you need to keep secret. I love my sister. I lost her this past year to Parkinson's. She's had that for about 5 years. And we had a great relationship. She loved me. She hated me at the same time. She didn't want me around, but she took me wherever she went on a date. If my future brother-in-law would let me go, They take me to the ice hockey games. They take me everywhere. And she was charged with taking care of me. My mother made her do that. And my mom passed away in 2006. And sometime about 2004, we finally owned up to my mother that one day my sister's supposed to take care of me. So we went to Richland School. Now we had, if we had kids, I could tell them the story and be true. We walked to school both ways. I mean, it didn't matter, snow or rain, we walked to school. We lived 3 doors from the school. So we walked to school. But one day, I told you I was not the smartest person in the world. I decided that there was a Jersey Farm milk truck that stopped at the school to deliver milk for the next day. Well, I knew that the Jersey Farm milk truck route stopped at my neighbor's house. Okay, it's such a long walk to walk 3 doors down from the school to your house. I'll get on the bumper of the truck and I'll just ride. And then when we get to the neighbor's house, I'll just get off the truck. Brilliant. Okay? You can see where the story's going, can't you? So we go, my sister said, Jim, I said, it'll be all right. Just going to the house. I'll see you at the house, smart ass. For some reason, Jersey Farms did not need to make a delivery to my neighbor's house that day. And I heard this voice about 2 houses down from the school. You better jump. I jumped off the back of a milk truck going down O'Brien Avenue. I'll roll through the grass. And we go in the house. Mama said, what happened to you? Nancy, what happened to your brother? He fell down. That was in 1959. In 2004, we finally told my mother the truth of what happened to me that day. I'm sorry. Paul tells jokes, I tell personal. My life is funnier than a lot of Paul's jokes are. But you think about Joseph, young man, really his father's pride and joy, and his brothers sell him into slavery. And he stays there in Egypt almost 20 years. 20 years. You know the story. His brothers finally have to come down and they move in and they live in the land of Goshen for all those years, and then his father dies. And his brothers know full well retribution is coming. And you remember the statement that Joseph made. You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. Paul said, I prayed 3 times that the thorn would be taken away from me. And God said, my grace is sufficient. And Paul said, it didn't make it any easier. I still felt it. But I understood that when I am weak, I'm really made strong. There are people that I've encountered in life that I didn't think treated me right. And boy, there is a part of me that I'm kind of like Paul when he wrote about the silversmith. He said, God will get him for that. I don't know about you, but I've been confronted with some people that I love them. It's like the little dinosaur. I'm the baby. God loves me. I love them, but I'm having to work on liking them. How about that for an answer? I'm working on trying to like them. And I struggled with that stump for a long time. Some of those stumps I'm still struggling with. And you know, I liked Lincoln's response. Some of my stumps are too hard to dig. Some of them are too knotty to split. And some of them are too wet and soggy to burn. So the only thing I can do is plow around them. Plow around them. How did you do it? By the grace of God, I am what I am. We have so much to be thankful for. There are so many people in our lives that have helped us along. And may we pray for the grace to be able to help other people along in life. Learn to accept the inevitable and learn to plow around the immovable. I appreciate your time in class. Somebody once told me, said, when you get finished, just be finished. So I'm finished.